A car tore past Jack in a blare of harsh, acrid light and pounding steel. Jack threw her shoulders around mid-stride and traced the darting white thread of the road back to its origin in the darkness. All was still, softly ebbing with receding noise. The streets streaked and smeared as Jack raced over the halogen-stained tarmac and skipped up onto the pavement of the opposite side of the road. Jack had managed to get as far as the Tesco Metro before she'd realised with a detached kind of amusement that she'd forgotten to put her shoes on, so she was running in that nimble, light-footed way that you adopt instinctively without shoes, each heel just kissing the ground. Jack emerged into the murky half-light diffusing from the road bridge a couple of 100 metres ahead. She peered down the path towards the bridge underpass and immediately regretted her choice of route. The bridge was 6 lanes wide, but the lack of light flattened the space underneath into an impenetrable black rectangle, and Jack could feel dread pooling into the pit of her stomach as it grew steadily larger. She hated not knowing. Jack could feel herself being pulled towards the void as though by the gravitational field of a black hole. The insistent thrum of a motorbike pushed at the frenzy of her feet on the concrete as she crossed the final few metres of open ground. It was going fast. Too fast. Her breath seared at the back of her throat, and a deep, guttural groan to her left tore the darkness open, and everything came spilling out, and the motorbike was upon her, and every particle in the air was imploding, and Jack knew she was being chased, and she surfaced, and the darkness was streaming from her body, and she was being enveloped by beautiful, beautiful halogen lights. Jack had paranoid schizophrenia. In the grimy underpass which lay between Jack's house and the town centre lived a homeless man. Jack used to be terrified of him. When they walked into town as little kids, Jack's mum would always take Danny's hand through the underpass and would position herself between Jack and Danny and the homeless man. Neither of them were allowed to walk through the underpass alone. As she grew older, Jack would walk alone through the underpass most weekends, keeping her eyes fixed firmly to the ground and accelerating past the muttering, cider-laced shambles towards the bright square of safety beyond. The homeless man had made the local paper once after he'd had a go at a couple of teenagers, shouting and ranting at them. The police had moved him on after that, but a few days later he was back, mumbling incoherently and plucking randomly at a guitar. Walking into town a week or two after her diagnosis, Jack had rounded the corner into the underpass to see the homeless man sat alone in the dirty yellow light, rocking back and forth and talking to himself and crying, and Jack had been blindsided by a wave of sadness so overwhelming it had been all she could do not to drop to the piss street tarmac and weep at the hopelessness of it all. The lights of the level crossing ahead were flashing and the alarms were screaming stop, and Jack watched in horror as the barriers shuddered and began to lower, and she had to make it, so she tore up the middle of the road, threw herself forward and made a desperate dive for the diminishing space beneath the barrier, gouging her spine against its metal and landing clumsily on her hands and knees. Her face contorted with pain, Jack lurched forward and head out onto the crossing, arms flailing wildly. Jack chose not to think about the gravity of her choice, choosing instead to focus on each rail as she met it. First rail. Second rail. Jack's breath came jagged and shallow as she slipped through the darkness. Third rail. Fourth rail. Halfway, Jack's eyes began to water. Fifth rail. Sixth rail. Jack became aware of an ominous metallic rumbling resonating through the steel around her feet. Jack could see the bright white flare of a pair of headlights hurtling towards her at such speed the train behind them was barely visible, a furious, screeching comet tail pulling out of the darkness. The long, angry blast of a train horn came avalanching down the tracks and hit her like a landslide, and Jack was loved, and she was good at what she did, and tomorrow the birds would be feeding down at the estuary, and Jack's mum would be getting the call from the police, and it was all too much, and she couldn't do it. She couldn't do it.